Hare Krishna, Nitai Gaur Sundar Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, fix my humble obeisances. I was just talking to Ritadhwaj Maharaj, so that's why I'm a little late.
Not a problem. Do you want to start now or wait for a few more minutes for others to join, or?
Let's see. Maybe we can start with the Kirtan and some other will be keep on joining.
Okay, then we'll start with Kirtan.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Janavallabha Giridvaridhari Gopi Janavallabha Giridvaridhari Jashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Jashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Jamunatira Vanachari Jamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Janavallabha Giridvaridhari Gopi Janavallabha Giridvaridhari Jashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Jashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Jamunatira Vanachari Jamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Gauranitai, Gauranitai, Jaya Gauranitai, Jaya Gauranitai, Gauranitai, Jaya Gauranitai, Jaya Radhe Sham, Radhe Sham, Jaya Radhe Sham, Jaya Radhe Sham, Radhe Sham, Radhe Sham, Jaya Radhe Sham, Jaya Radhe, Jaya Radhe, Jaya Shri Radhe, Jaya Radhe, Jaya Radhe, Jaya Radhe, Jaya Shri Radhe, Haribo, 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 Nitai Gaur, Haribo, Nitai Gaur, Haribo, 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 Nitai Gaur, Haribo. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Shri Shri Gaur Nitai ki jai, Shri Shri Patita Pavana Jagannatha Swami ki jai, Shri Shri Giriraj Govardhana ki jai, Shri Shri Radha Shama Sundar ki jai, Shri Shri Nishingadev Bhakta Prahlad Maharaj ki jai, Samaveta Bhakta Vrinda ki jai, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories, all glories, all glories to Shri Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga. Glories to Srila Prabhupada. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayam Udirayat Nasta Prayashu Abhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtaki Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swamin iti namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharane Nirvisesha Shunyavadi Paschitya Desha Tarane Vansha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubi Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So we are reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 10, Chapter 1, Text number 4. Let's go ahead and read the verse. Nivrittatasar upagiyamanad Babao sadachchotra mano biramat Ka uttama shloka gunanuvadat Uman nirajeta vina pasugnat. Do the word for word. Nivritta, release from. Tarshai, lust or material activities. Upagiyamanat, which is described or sung. Baba asadat, which is the right medicine for the material disease. Shotra, the process of oral reception. Manaha, the subject matter of thought for the mind. Abhiramat, from the pleasing vibration of such glorification. Ka, who. Uttama shloka, of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Guna anubadat, from describing such activities. Puman, a person. Nirajita, can keep himself aloof. Vina, except. Pashugyat, either a butcher or one who is killing his own personal existence. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Glorification of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is performed in the Parampara system, that is, it is conveyed from spiritual master to disciple. Such glorification is relished by those no longer interested in the false, temporary glorification of this cosmic manifestation. Descriptions of the Lord are the right medicine for the conditioned soul undergoing repeated birth and death. Therefore, who will cease hearing such glorification of the Lord except a butcher or one who is killing his own self? Purport. In India, it is the practice among the general populace to hear about Krishna, either from the Bhagavad Gita or from Srimad Bhagavatam, in order to gain relief from the disease of repeated birth and death. Although India is now fallen, when there is a message that someone will speak about the Bhagavad Gita or Srimad Bhagavatam, thousands of people still gather to hear. This verse indicates, however, that such recitation of Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam must be done by persons completely freed from material desires, nivritta tarshayi. Everyone within this material world, beginning from Brahma down to the insignificant ant, is full of material desires for sense enjoyment, and everyone is busy in sense gratification. But when thus engaged, one cannot fully understand the value of Krishna Katha, either in the form of the Bhagavad Gita or of Srimad Bhagavatam. If we hear the glories of the Supreme Personality of Godhead from liberated persons, this hearing will certainly free us from the bondage of material activities. But hearing Srimad Bhagavatam spoken by a professional reciter cannot actually help us achieve liberation. Krishna Katha is very simple. In the Bhagavad Gita, it is said that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. As he himself explains, Mataha parataram nanyat kinchid ashti dhananjaya. O Arjuna, there is no truth superior to me. Simply by understanding this fact, that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one can become a liberated person. But, especially in this age, because people are interested in hearing the Bhagavad Gita from unscrupulous persons who depart from the simple presentation of the Bhagavad Gita and distort it for their personal satisfaction, they fail to derive the real benefit. There are big scholars, politicians, philosophers, and scientists who speak on the Bhagavad Gita in their own polluted way, and people in general hear from them, being uninterested in hearing the glories of the Supreme Personality of Godhead from a devotee. A devotee is one who has no other motive for reciting the Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam than to serve the Lord. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has therefore advised us to hear the glories of the Lord from a realized person. Yaha Bhagavata Pada Vaishnavera Stani. Unless one is personally a realized soul in the science of Krishna consciousness, a neophyte should not approach him to hear about the Lord, for this is strictly forbidden by Srila Sanatana Goswami, who quotes from the Padma Purana. Vaishnava Mukogyanam Putam Harikatamritam Shavanam Naiva Kartavyam Sharpochitam Yata Payaha. One should avoid hearing from a person not situated in Vaishnava behavior. A Vaishnava is Nivrita Trisha. That is, he has no material purpose, for his only purpose is to preach Krishna consciousness. So-called scholars, philosophers, and politicians exploit the importance of the Bhagavad Gita by distorting its meaning for their own purposes. Therefore, this verse warns that Krishna Katha should be recited by a person who is Nivrita Krishna. Shukadeva Goswami epitomizes the proper reciter of the Srimad Bhagavatam, and Parikshit Maharaj, who purposely left his kingdom and family prior to meeting death, epitomizes the person fit to hear it. A qualified reciter of Srimad Bhagavatam gives the right medicine, Bhava Sadi, for the conditioned souls. The Krishna consciousness movement is therefore trying to train qualified preachers to recite Srimad Bhagavatam and the Bhagavad Gita throughout the entire world, so that people in general in all parts of the world may take advantage of this movement and thus be relieved from the threefold miseries of material existence. The instructions of the Bhagavad Gita and the descriptions of Srimad Bhagavatam are so pleasing that almost anyone suffering from the threefold miseries of material existence will desire to hear the glories of the Lord from these books and thus benefit on the path of liberation. Two classes of men, however, will never be interested in hearing the message of the Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam: those who are determined to commit suicide, and those determined to kill cows and other animals for the satisfaction of their own tongues. Although such persons may make a show of hearing Srimad Bhagavatam at a Bhagavata Saptaha, this is but another creation of the karmis, who cannot derive any benefit from such a performance. The word pashogyat is important in this connection. Pashogyat means butcher. Persons fond of performing ritualistic ceremonies for elevation to the higher planetary systems must offer sacrifices by killing animals. Lord Buddhadev therefore rejected the authority of the Vedas because his mission was to stop animal sacrifices, which are recommended in Vedic ritualistic ceremonies. Nindasik yagna vidir aha shutijatam sadaya ridaya darshita pashugatam keshavarita buddha sharira jaya jagadisha hari. Even though animal sacrifices are sanctioned in Vedic ceremonies, men who kill animals for such ceremonies are considered butchers. Butchers cannot be interested in Krishna consciousness, for they are already materially allured. Their only interest lies in developing comforts for the temporary body. Bhogeshvaya prashaktanam taya parita chetasam yavasayatmika buddhihi samado na vidiyate. In the minds of those who are too attached to sense enjoyment and material opulence, and who are bewildered by such things, the resolute determination of devotional service to the Supreme Lord does not take place. Srila Narottam Das Thakur says, Manusya Janmapaya Radha Krishna Na Bhajiya Janiya Shuniya Visha Kainu. Anyone who is not Krishna conscious, and who therefore does not engage in the service of the Lord, is also a Pashogya, for he is willingly drinking poison. Such a person cannot be interested in Krishna Katha because he still has a desire for material sense gratification. He is not Nivritta Trishna. As it is said, Trivargikas te Purusha Vimukha Harimedasaha. Those interested in Trivarga, that is, in Dharma, Artha, and Kama, are religious for the sake of achieving a material position with which to gain better facilities for sense gratification. Such persons are killing themselves by willingly keeping themselves in the cycle of birth and death. They cannot be interested in Krishna consciousness. For Krishna Katha, topics about Krishna consciousness, there must be a speaker and a hearer, both of whom can be interested in Krishna consciousness if they are no longer interested in material topics. One can actually see how this attitude automatically develops in persons who are Krishna conscious. Although the devotees of the Krishna consciousness movement are quite young men, they no longer read materialistic newspapers, magazines, and so on, for they are no longer interested in such topics, nivritta karshayi. They completely give up the bodily understanding of life. For topics concerning Uttama Sloka, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the spiritual master speaks, and the disciple hears with attention. Unless both of them are free from material desires, they cannot be interested in topics of Krishna consciousness. The spiritual master and disciple do not need to understand anything more than Krishna, because simply by understanding Krishna and talking about Krishna, one becomes a perfectly learned person. The Lord sits within everyone's heart, and by the grace of the Lord, the devotee receives instructions directly from the Lord himself, who says in the Bhagavad Gita, Sarvasya chaham hridishani vishto patashmita jnanam apohanam cha vedas tasarver aham eva vedyo vedanta krit vedavid eva chaham. I am seated in everyone's heart, and from me come remembrance, knowledge, and forgetfulness. By all the Vedas, I am to be known. Indeed, I am the compiler of Vedanta, and I am the knower of the Vedas. Krishna consciousness is so exalted that one who is perfectly situated in Krishna consciousness under the direction of the spiritual master is fully satisfied by reading Krishna Katha as found in Srimad Bhagavatam, the Bhagavad Gita, and similar Vedic literatures. Since merely talking about Krishna is so pleasing, we can simply imagine how pleasing it is to render service to Krishna. When discourses on Krishna Katha take place between a liberated spiritual master and his disciple, others also sometimes take advantage of hearing these topics and also benefit. These topics are the medicine to stop the repetition of birth and death. The cycle of repeated birth and death, by which one takes on different bodies again and again, is called bhava or bhava rog. If anyone, willingly or unwillingly, hears Krishna Katha, his bhava rog, the disease of birth and death, will certainly stop. Therefore, Krishna Katha is called bhavausada, the remedy to stop the repetition of birth and death. Karmis, or persons attached to material sense enjoyment, generally cannot give up their material desires, but Krishna Katha is such a potent medicine that if one is induced to hear Krishna Kirtan, he will certainly be freed from this disease. A practical example is Dhruva Maharaj, who at the end of his tapasya was fully satisfied. When the Lord wanted to give Dhruva a benediction, Dhruva refused it. Samin kritarto shmi param nayache. My dear Lord, he said, I am fully satisfied. I do not ask for any benediction for material sense gratification. We actually see that even young boys and girls in the Krishna consciousness movement have given up their long practice of bad habits like illicit sex, meat eating, intoxication, and gambling. Because Krishna consciousness is so potent that it gives them full satisfaction, they are no longer interested in material sense gratification. And thus we end that purport. Well, Hare Krishna, and again, it's my good fortune and pleasure to speak to you this evening for you. It's our morning. Nitai Gaur Sundar Prabhu chose this verse. It's really a very, very beautiful verse from the Srimad Bhagavatam. So let us highlight a few points. I mean, Srila Prabhupada's purport is very, very beautifully written and really explains everything quite in detail. But still, we'll try to highlight a few of the points that Prabhupada makes. This word, Babao Sadach, and Prabhupada translates that as the medicine. He says it's the right medicine to cure the material disease. So what is that material disease? Oftentimes it's referred to the cycle of repeated birth and death, the wheel of samsara, in which the jiva can take on some 8,400,000 species, different possibilities of different bodies. And that is called his, as Prabhupada said, his bhava or his bhava rog. That's his disease. Rog means disease. And his disease is that he's so illusioned that he continues to perform activities for which he will get reactions, and those reactions then will yield him various bodies. And again, the possibilities are practically endless. Which kind of brings up the point that one has to understand what actions are are beneficial and which actions are not. In the Bhagavad Gita, there are three kind of categories that are mentioned: karma, vikarma, and akarma. And in that context, karma refers to pious activities. Pious activities as defined by scripture, of course, because who is to say what is pious and impious? If you ask 10 people, you might get 10 different answers as to what is pious and what is impious. But we have to have a standard, and that standard, it has to be the scripture. Otherwise, it will just remain my opinion or your opinion. So it has to be some standard. So according to scripture, there are certain activities that are categorized as pious. And if you perform those activities, and within them certain sacrifices and so on and so forth, you may be so fortunate as to elevate yourself to the heavenly planets. So that's karma. Vikarma, of course, is literally translated as forbidden action. Again, as defined by scripture, what are those forbidden actions, those sinful activities? And the result of that, well, you will be demoted to the lower planetary systems. This is the result. So for pious activities, you're elevated to the heavenly planets, and for the impious activities, you are demoted to the lower planetary system. But that keeps you within the material realm. Even if you can perform pious activities successfully, the best you can hope to achieve is to go to the heavenly planets. And that time is also measured. We hear of these, amazing lengths of time, duration of time, of life of Lord Brahma or, the other demigods. It's amazing when we hear about these things. And by, our little scant 100 years, on this Earth planet, it seems quite amazing that you can have this type of enjoyment for millions and millions and millions of years. But eventually the time, runs out. And again, you have to come back down. So it's kind of like fuel. You'll have a certain amount of fuel in reserve in your rocket. And, you can fly as long as that fuel reserve is there. When it's exhausted, then again, you come back down. So this is then setting us up for this wheel of birth, death, old age, and disease. Now, fortunately, we have a third category. If karma and vikarma keep us within the cycle, then the third category of akarma, or literally activities that do not get any material reaction, activities of a transcendental nature, they liberate us from the cycle of birth, death, old age, and disease. And so this is what is being spoken about here. When it's spoken about Krishna Katha, this is the akarmic type of activity. Very powerful. We may not even understand it, how it's working, but it's very powerful because it's removing the desire for material activity. And so therefore, Prabhupada says, this is the cure for bhava roga. It's a given. Bhagavad Gita, it explains that the material world is a place of misery, whether it's from Abrahma, Bhuvana, Loka, Puna Arvartana, Arjuna, Tamopete to Konteya, Punarjanmana Vidyate. Whether it's the highest planet in the material world to the lowest, ultimately, they are all places of misery. And what happens? Repeated birth and death. So it doesn't make a difference whether it's the highest planet or the lowest planet. The same things are going on: birth, death, old age, and disease. Now, it's mentioned there, this word shotra, and the process is through oral reception. It's the medicine here that we've been discussing, Krishna Katha, Bhavao Sadach. It's the medicine. And how is that medicine administered? Well, through oral reception, through the ear. We pour in this Bhavao Sadach, this medicine, in the ear. And it's simple. As Prabhupada says, it's a very simple process. If the speaker is bona fide and if the hearer is bona fide, then it works. And it has the effect of absorbing the consciousness, mentioned here mano, the subject matter of thought for the mind. It absorbs the consciousness, that we're pouring in, that we're going to be contemplating. So we have to be very careful about what we put in. And there are many possibilities. Most people don't pour in Krishna Katha. Most people pour in complete nonsense that they're bombarded with all around them. But sometimes they themselves make a choice to pour in nonsense, by watching things or hearing things that you don't necessarily have to. You have a choice in that, rather than just be, held captive, sitting before a television set. There are alternatives. Hear Krishna Katha, for example. So we have to be very clear what the result is of our selection. But it's mentioned here, Viramat. It's very pleasing. The Krishna Katha, it's a very pleasing vibration. because it's glorifying Krishna and his nectarian pastimes. But it requires a cultivation. Oftentimes Prabhupada says it requires cultivation. It requires practice. The first time that one sits down to hear Krishna Katha, it's not that one will have such an overwhelming experience. One certainly may, but usually it takes time to get a taste for this. And once you get a taste, then it is a most pleasing thing. So therefore, in the beginning, we have to regulate our hearing Krishna Katha. We may not have a very strong, spontaneous attraction to hear Krishna Katha. Many devotees don't regularly study Prabhupada's books, for example. Many do, but many do not. And if you don't have that habit, then you can fall into a vicious cycle of not reading for long periods of time. It just happens like that. So we have to be very clear that it is a cultivation. And in the beginning, we have to regulate it just through making a plan. As it is said, and we've mentioned many times, that if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. You have to make a plan for everything. Just like we make plans for everything else we do in life, we have to make a plan for hearing Krishna Katha, particularly in light of the fact that this is the most important thing, to hear Krishna Katha. All the other things are of less importance in our lives, because this is for our eternal benefit. So we have to make a plan. And therefore, the plan should entail, okay, what am I going to read? How many pages am I going to read? What time of the day am I going to read? There should be a very clear plan for this. And then, when this is done in a regulated fashion, over a period of time, when one experiences the purifying benefits of hearing Krishna Katha, one will be so attracted. One will be so attracted that one will not even think about wanting to miss a session of Krishna Katha. It's pointed out here, Nivrita Tarshayi, that one should hear Krishna Katha, particularly the Bhagavatam, from someone who is free of material desire, one who is fixed in the practice of Krishna consciousness. Now, Prabhupada, he quotes a verse from the Antilila of the Chaitanya Charitamrita, and this verse is spoken in context with, there was a poet, quite an accomplished poet that had come from Bengal, and he had composed some poetry about Lord Jagannath and Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And from a literary point of view, it had all its embellishments and it sounded very good. But when Sarup Damodar Goswami heard this, he saw that this is complete nonsense, because the poet, he made a distinction between Lord Jagannath's body and his soul. And as we know, the Lord Jagannath is complete spirit. There's no question of a body and a soul. So he had not understood this. Although he had the ability to poeticize things and present things in very beautiful language, he didn't understand the philosophy at all of Krishna consciousness. So therefore, Sarup Damodar Goswami chastised him. But then he said, if you really want, and that's the verse that Prabhupada quoted, that if you want to understand Srimad Bhagavatam, you must approach a self-realized Vaishnava and hear from him. So he made it very clear. And Prabhupada spoke this in the context of this notion of the Bhagavat Saptaha, of professional professional reciters of the Bhagavatam professional professional reciters of the Srimad Bhagavatam, getting a big audience and speaking for 7 days continuously. And they may be very expert. It's certainly very entertaining. They know all the stories and they can speak in certain ways that really capture the attention of the audience. But because they themselves are not qualified, they're not authorized, they come together with their audience for 7 days, and then everyone leaves and there's no change of heart. There has to be a change of heart. That's the proof that the Bhagavatam has actually been heard from a bona fide source. There should be purification that takes place. Not that one comes and just reads Bhagavatam to collect, as Prabhupada says, some dakshin or other rewards. And Prabhupada mentions money or goods like umbrellas. That the reciter of the Bhagavatam shouldn't come just to collect a bunch of umbrellas, cloth and fruit, but comes there to speak on behalf of his spiritual master and the disciplic succession, like that. And if one does that, then it has a very powerful effect. And Prabhupada quoted the verses, and the verse we quote all the time before we speak on the Bhagavatam, right? Nasta prayasha abhadreshu nityam bhagavata sevaya bhagavati uttama shloke bhaktir bhavati naishtaki. And what is that? This is in the first chapter, first canto, second chapter of the Bhagavatam. So what does it say? It says by regular attendance. So it means it has to be done regularly. And Prabhupada instituted this in all the temples and centers early on. It should be done daily in the morning. He said by regular attendance in classes on the Bhagavatam, and he couples that with by rendering of service to the pure devotee. What happens? All that is troublesome to the heart is almost completely destroyed. So it has a purifying effect. And as you remove that unwanted rubbish, then what happens? Loving service unto the personality of Godhead, who is praised with transcendental songs, is established as an irrevocable fact. This is the result of actually hearing the Bhagavatam from a bona fide source. In that same chapter of the first canto, this is spoken about quite directly in Shinvatam Swakata Krishna Punya Shravana Kirtana, that the heart is cleansed from material enjoyment just if one can somehow or another develop the urge. We should develop the urge to hear the messages of the Bhagavatam. So again, it's a cultivation. We are very fortunate. We are so very fortunate, and we don't always reflect on this enough, I believe, that somehow or another we came in contact with Prabhupada and his books. We could have come in contact with someone else. We could have come in contact with some other literature. But we came in contact with Prabhupada and his books. And this is very rare. It is something of tremendous value. And only those of us who study Prabhupada's books daily can really understand this, because it was Prabhupada's labor of love to give us the Bhagavatam. I mean, he sacrificed like anything to translate his books. Everyone else was resting, and Prabhupada was there, with one light on his desk, and he was translating for hours, 4 or 5 hours in the early morning hours of each day. And it was a daily affair. He hardly missed. Now, an interesting point is that it wasn't that Prabhupada was just translating and commenting upon these verses just for us, Prabhupada said that he also got benefit from reading. Devotees would sometimes wonder, they would see Prabhupada sitting, if he wasn't preaching or counseling or teaching devotees, he would be reading his books. He would be reading, chanting the holy name or reading his books. And so one devotee asked him, how is that? You've already translated these books. You're already a self-realized soul. So, I mean, you don't really have the need to read them. You've already realized. But Prabhupada told him, this is actually from a something a devotee had given in an interview, and Prabhupada said that he said, I read my books every day because I learn something when I read my books. He said, these are not my books. I do not write these books. And then, as Prabhupada said that, the devotee was watching Prabhupada, and it seemed like that something, from his perception, there was something almost mystical that came over Prabhupada at that point. And then he said, every morning when I sit here to write my books, he says, Krishna comes personally and dictates to me what I write. I simply take dictation from Krishna to write these books. Therefore, when I read them, even I learn something. So Prabhupada considered these books Krishna's books because Krishna was dictating to him. So look at this, devotees. We have Krishna's dictation. This is Krishna's dictation on the pages of the Srimad Bhagavatam. When Prabhupada was sending one of his leading disciples at the time, Brahmananda Maharaj at the time, he was sending him to preach in Africa. And with some of these devotees, they opened whole countries up, And so he was sent to Africa. And Prabhupada said something very interesting as he was sending him off. He said that my books are more important than myself. My books are more important to myself. Of course, this is something that Prabhupada taught us all along, that Vani, the instructions, was more important than Vapu. But I thought this was quite interesting. My books are more important than myself. He often referred to the Bhagavatam as his life's work. I was recently concluding the Chaitanya Charitamrita because I generally try to read like 41 pages a day. I've been doing that for quite a long time. So anyway, I was finishing up this Chaitanya Charitamrita, and in the concluding words of the Antya-lila, Prabhupada really captures this mood. I thought I would read that for you. It really struck me. So Prabhupada writes, although according to material vision, His Divine Grace, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada, passed away from this material world on the last day of December 1936, I still consider His Divine Grace to be always present with me by His Vani, His words. There are two ways of association, by Vani and by Vapu. Vani means words, and Vapu means physical presence. Physical presence is sometimes appreciable and sometimes not, but Vani continues to exist eternally. Therefore, we must take advantage of the Vani, not the physical presence. After he passed away, I started the fortnightly magazine Back to Godhead sometime in 1944 and tried to spread the cult of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu through this magazine. After I took sannyas, a well-wishing friend suggested that I write books instead of magazines. Magazines, he said, might be thrown away, but books remain perpetually. Then I attempted to write Srimad Bhagavatam. Before that, when I was a householder, I had written on Srimad Bhagavatam and had completed about 1,100 pages. But somehow or other, the manuscript was stolen. In any case, when I had published Srimad Bhagavatam first canto in 3 volumes in India, I thought of going to the USA. By the mercy of His divine grace, I was able to come to New York on September 17th, 1965. Since then, I have translated many books, including Srimad Bhagavatam, the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, teachings of Lord Chaitanya, and many others. So this is how Prabhupada chose to complete the Chaitanya Charitamrita, making it very clear that the Vani is more important, and that his translation of the first canto of the Bhagavatam was also a very major component of his preaching. He took 200 sets with him, actually, on the Jaladuta. So it was so important. We hear also from the Bhagavatam itself that Srimad Bhagavatam Puranam Amalam, that it is the spotless Purana. Beautiful verse from the 12th canto. It is most dear to the Vaishnavas because it describes the pure and supreme knowledge of the Paramahamsas. This Bhagavatam reveals the means for becoming free from all material work, together with the processes of transcendental knowledge, renunciation, and devotion. Anyone who seriously tries to understand Srimad Bhagavatam, who properly hears and chants it with devotion, becomes completely liberated. Bhagavatam. Now, it's also mentioned here, Pasho Nyat. It's only a butcher or one who is killing his own personal existence that cannot access the Bhagavatam. Prabhupada quotes from the Gita, Bhogaishvayam Prashaktanam, that in the minds of those who are too attached to sense enjoyment and material opulence and who are bewildered by such things, the resolute determination of devotional service to the Supreme Lord does not take place. And so, the various categories. Persons who are found of performing ritualistic ceremonies for elevation to the higher planetary systems. They offer some yagnas, like taking Trivarga. They're interested in Dharma, Artha, and Kama, just for the sake of some material elevation. They're also killing themselves, Prabhupada says, by keeping themselves in the cycle of birth and death. So I think, when we hear this, we can take it as a warning that we have to be very clear on the goal of Krishna consciousness, that Rupa Goswami has given a very clear definition, and we have to be aware of that definition, and we have to make that as our goal. As far away as we may be from that goal, we should at least assign that goal early on. He mentions this in several places. It's quoted in the Madhya Lila, but originally it's from the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. The Anya Vilasatu Sunyam, Gyana Karmadya Nabritam Anukulena Krishnanu Shilanam Bhakta Uttama. So he gives some components. What does first-class devotional service look like? He says, first of all, it should be devoid of material desires, devoid of knowledge obtained by monistic philosophy, and devoid of the desire for fruit of action. And what else? One must serve Krishna favorably. What's favorable? As Krishna desires. So it's on his terms. It's not on our terms. So at least we should have that as a goal. Very clear. That should be our target. If we don't have a target, what are we going to aim for? We should have that target clearly assigned as early on as possible. Right from the beginning of the Bhagavatam, it's clear that the Bhagavatam is only dealing with topics of Krishna. Dharma projita kaitavotra paramon nitsama niramatsaranam satam, it is said. That it rejects all other materialistic religious activities which are materially motivated. It propounds the highest truth. It's only propounding the knowledge about Krishna and Krishna's devotees. And it's devoid of dharma, artha, kama, and moksha. So many nice points are mentioned in this particular verse. The Bhagavatam, it has the ability to grant us liberation, but we have to make a very clear plan for studying the Bhagavatam on a daily basis. And to the extent we do that, to the extent we'll get benefit, we should seek the association of senior Vaishnavas to hear the Bhagavatam from, as Prabhupada said. And in this way, we'll get so much benefit from doing so. If we've actually heard the Bhagavatam, or we're actually hearing the Bhagavatam, and we are deriving the benefits of doing that, which means that we're purifying the consciousness and we're uncovering, that innate love for Krishna that's there within the heart, and we're tasting that, naturally want to give this to others. So Prabhupada's program was to not simply hoard it for ourselves, not simply be concerned with purifying our own hearts and experiencing, liberation and pleasure from that, but we should also want to give this to other persons. Because if the heart is really being purified, then naturally you feel compassion for those who have not yet been introduced to the Bhagavatam and to Srila Prabhupada in the process of Krishna consciousness. So we want to become givers in the terminology of Vaisheshika Prabhu. We want to become givers. We want to give this knowledge to others. And only a couple weeks ago, we passed the Bhadra Purnima, the gift sets of Bhagavatam to others. That's something that can go on, year round. It should go on year round. And we're fast approaching, the anniversary of when the Gita was spoken in December. So we can think about that, become givers. And this way, really get great benefit. Because you find that the more you give, the more you get. Because you get special blessings and special mercy. So these are the thoughts I had in a little bit of time that we have been allotted. Nitai Gaur Sundar Prabhu, any reflections or anything?
Thank you for Maharaj for summarizing this wonderful purport, and you have set up a very, the target of our sadhana, whatever life should be very, and we hope, as you said, by sadhu sangha, by your association, we'll be able to make progress in that path. I had one question, Maharaj, in this purport. Prabhupada writes that even Lord Brahma has material desires. He is our, he got knowledge from Krishna himself. How is that possible?
Well, we understand that oftentimes great souls are used by Krishna to just show the nature of the material world and how anybody can be conditioned like this. So that's one explanation. Just like Arjuna is an eternal associate of the Lord, and seemingly it certainly appears that he's fallen under illusion because he can't really understand the bigger picture and what he should be doing. So the Lord sometimes uses these great devotees to teach a lesson that we should be so careful. We should be so careful. Yeah, so that brings up a point that even if we have been devotees for a long time and we are doing the right things and all of that, we have to be careful that we don't become proud, that I'm a senior, I know better, I should receive the respect of others, and that will simply do us in, because if we become proud and we start to view others in a condescending way, it's easy then to commit Vaishnava aparad, and this is very, very, very dangerous. We have to be very careful with that. Actually, if we are hearing properly, if we're practicing properly, then humility should be, one of the outcomes, even in the lives of our great acharyas. We've been reading very beautiful from Giriraj Swami Maharaj's book, I'll Build You a Temple. So we're having readings of that. And, there was the instance when Prabhupada finally left Bombay and he went to Vrindavan. And the devotee who eventually became Srinathji Prabhu drove him to the airport, drove him to the train station, actually. And, here was a person who had continuously for more than 10 years been fighting with Prabhupada on the philosophy and everything like that. He tried to find fault in Prabhupada and such things. But now, somehow or another, he surrendered at the last moment. He surrendered to Prabhupada. And so anyway, it was the whole kind of intrigue that the train was supposed to depart at a certain time, but then they had announced or something in the newspaper that it was departing on that particular day on half an hour earlier, and so they didn't know it to the last minute. So they raced to the to the train station, and so somehow they made it just in time. So they took Prabhupada on and everything like that, and Srinathji got off, but Prabhupada called him back, and Prabhupada, as Prabhupada was lying there in his cabin, he drew Srinathji close to him and thanked him for his service, thanked him for driving him and everything like that. And right then and there, Srinathji just offered dandavats, and took Prabhupada's feet on his head and just surrendered. And then when he returned to the car, he found that on the steering wheel was Prabhupada's garland. So he got some special mercy. The point is, Prabhupada's humility. Prabhupada thanked him, really appreciated him for the service he had rendered. So what to speak of us? What to speak of us? So it's really important to develop and retain humility. Otherwise, we can fall into the trap of committing Vaishnava aparad. Then everything's finished. What a waste. What a shame. Terrible shame. Anything else?
Thank you, Maharaj. Anyone else has any question for Maharaj? Please open your mic. I cannot see everyone, so go ahead and speak.
Or any reflection? Any reflection from the verse or purport? Thing you like to share?
Hare Krishna Maharaj. In the beginning of the lecture, you talked about, going, you have to cycle birth and death, and you have to sometimes go to the heavenly planets, because that's what some people desire. So if you do go to heavenly planets, do you become a devta there?
Yes.
And then do you have special powers because you're a devta?
You're sorry, I couldn't.
And because you're a devta, do you have these special powers?
Oh yeah. Well, we know Scripture tells us there's some 33 million demigods, right? So yes, certainly, if you go to the heavenly planets, you may take a birth as a demigod, or an assistant of a demigod, or something like this. Certainly, you have a certain type of a body, long duration of life. you don't really age, I mean, in terms of physical transformation, but at some point you do die. You don't experience, the difficulty with birth, old age, and disease, but eventually you die when the time is over. So it's a very heavenly kind of a situation. So yes, you can have that from pious activity, but even that, I mean, karma kanda is aimed at this, but to actually practice karma kanda is not a small thing either. There's quite a few things that you need to do, a lot of rituals, a lot of sacrifices, and so on and so forth. So just to kind of like attain that level of piety is also not easy. So the notion is that if you're going to work so hard just to attain something that's ultimately temporary, and you're going to have to give up at some point, then why not put the effort in practicing bhakti or Krishna consciousness, to get something that's eternal. So that's the idea there. That's the idea.
So Maharaj, a follow-up question on that is, do the devtas, do they have the ability, or do they do bhakti so that they can actually go back to Krishna lok, or do they have to come back to earth again?
It can go either way. It's possible for them to elevate themselves, to purify themselves, and to go back to Godhead. That's possible. But oftentimes they're not able to do that, and they again come back. So it's possible. It's possible. But we wouldn't want to risk it, as a method to going back to Godhead, to go through, practice of karma kanda, and to somehow, okay, we take birth as a demigod, and then hopefully we can elevate ourselves from there. It's still quite risky, because we do know, and we read about the demigods, they have their conditioning, and they can sometimes, succumb to material desire and things like that. So it's quite a risky proposition. Again, if it requires such effort just to get to the heavenly planets, then why not, make the same effort to become a pure devotee? It's and then it's for something eternal. Because even if you do attain the post of Lord Brahma, it's still, you ultimately have to give it up at some point, even though it's a extraordinary length of time, but still we have to give it up.
Yeah, Maharaj, as someone passes away in India, they write Swargavasi, that they're going to the heavenly planets. And then if a devotee dies, of course, they say, Vaikunthavasi. So
yeah.
And
yeah. Sorry. Go ahead. Yeah, I mean, we're so fortunate that we have very clear understanding of this. I mean, how can someone who understands about bhakti and the ultimate goal of bhakti want to practice karma kanda to go to the heavenly planets? Because ultimately, it's also a lot of endeavor, but you just go there temporarily. I mean, if you understand that, why would you want to endeavor for something temporary if you can place the same amount of effort to become Krishna conscious, a pure devotee, and as you say, become a Vaikunthavasi? It's just because I think it's a lack of knowledge. People don't really understand, very clearly. Prabhupada makes it very clear. And sometimes it's not made very clear,
Yeah, I think people think that going to heavenly planets is the goal of life.
Yeah, the goal. Well, it's a temporary goal. That's what they don't understand fully, Even if they make it, even if you do make it, which isn't so easy, right? But even if you do make it, still you have to give it up. After all that effort to somehow or another become a demigod, and eventually you have to give it up again. What's the point? What's the point? Because even as a devotee, even if you don't make it, well, then you get birthed in a family of devotees or in an aristocratic family, and you continue. And whatever you gain is to your eternal credit. You make 50% in one life, okay, then you continue from 51 in the next, and you keep accumulating until which time you come to, 100%, and you're qualified to return back home, back to Godhead. So seems like a good deal to me.
And also, the Devtas used to come to the earthly planets before, but how come they don't do it anymore?
Well, if we don't like the material world very much, from all the stuff that's going on here, why would the demigods like to come here? I mean, it smells bad, it looks bad, everything is now contaminated, right? I mean, why would the demigods want to come to a place that's so polluted? It's like it's like a dump, right? I mean, we don't like to go to like the garbage dump because it smells and it's everything. It's unsightly. No interest, right? It's always kept somewhere out of sight, We don't like. Why would they want to come here? Everything's polluted. The water is polluted. The food's polluted. The soil's polluted. Why would they want to come? There's not attraction unless the practice of bhakti is going on. Then they'll come. There's an instance when Prabhupada was in England, and devotees had arranged, and they made flyers, and they tried to do whatever kind of promotion they could, but no one came, and they were feeling quite bad. And Prabhupada said, "No, you did not see. Narada Muni was there, so they came. They came. Prabhupada could see. Obviously, the devotees couldn't, but Prabhupada could see, and all these personalities came because the pure devotee was speaking about Krishna, and they were having Krishna kirtan, and they were attracted. So in certain instances, they can be, because bhakti can attract them. Yeah.
Thank you much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing. That opened up some nice points. Okay, we're at almost 10:50, at 10:15 for us, and 9:15 for you, right? Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I think we'll end here, and
Thank you, Maharaj.
Krishna willing, we'll be back in a month's time
Thank you, Maharaj.
with
We'll do
Nitai
the
Gaur.
Vaishnava Pranam.
Huh?
We'll do the Vaishnava Pranam, Maharaj.
Please.
Okay, I'll mute. Everyone can unmute yourself and let's start.
Vanchakalpadrupaya Vaishnavibhyo
Wonderful class, Maharaj.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you very much, Maharaj.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you all.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Thank you.